I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce today's presenters, Bianca Lager and Cynthia Woods. Bianca is the president of Social Intelligence, where she drives a vision to support organizations in protecting workplace culture and preventing harassment. Bianca obtained an MBA from Pepperdine University with a concentration in dispute resolution and is a LinkedIn learning instructor. Cynthia, the VP of Sales, Marketing, and Account Management for AccuSource, has over 20 years of experience in the human resources services industries, including 16 years in employment background screening. Prior to her current role at AccuSource, Cynthia held positions managing business development, enterprise account management, partner relations, and marketing. She has also held leadership and major market sales roles in staffing and payroll. I will now turn the presentation over to Bianca and Cynthia.
Thank you so much, April. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet all of you, at least via audio and via the webinar. Welcome to today's webinar. Again, the power of social media, hate speech, violence, and employment background checks. Hopefully all of you are here today because you're curious, because you maybe have been dealing with online data or things happening within your organization online, or are just, interested in kind of ways that screening services. So if that's the case, we're glad you're here, and hopefully we can give you all some great information that'll help you learn a little bit about what social media screening is all about. Certainly in today's news, you almost can't avoid hearing about it. You can't avoid hearing about folks being fired for tweets or, everything that happened, of course, with the Capitol riots. It's become very prevalent in today's world and society, and of course bleeds into organizational policy and really just, hey, what are we going to do to confront these things, and what are the mechanisms that are legal and compliant that we can use to mitigate risk. So we're going to go over today social media usage trends, platform statistics, behavioral insights. What's going on? What are we talking about when we mean social media data? Where is this data? Where are these platforms? And what are the trends going on around that? Then we're going to dive in a little bit about how we're going to formalize social media screening. If you are doing the DIY approach and Googling your candidates, we'll talk about the sort of risks and pitfalls there. And then maybe you haven't even really thought about all the compliance concerns that you should be considering, or maybe you've gotten in hot water already because of those concerns. So we'll discuss kind of what formalizing social media screening is all about. And then lastly, we'll go over what it looks like. A lot of folks, when I talk about social media screening, they're like, well, what does that even mean? What are you talking about when you mean a social media screening report? So we'll show you a bit of a sample. We'll show you, of course, on your AccuSource dashboard what that looks like and how simple it is, the ordering process. It's not as daunting as you think. We really like to show folks, what it actually looks like and what the workflow is, how this affects your job if you actually were going to go about ordering it, and what it would entail on the operational end. So quick disclaimer before we go into it any further. Please note, of course, that Social Intelligence and AccuSource, neither of us are law firms. So the material that we're presenting here is informational only. Nothing contained that should be construed as legal advice. And we encourage you to consult with your legal counsel and obtain a legal opinion specific to your needs. Okay, pesky disclaimer out of the way. So let's get into it. Let's get into the juiciness of it all. Again, my name is Bianca Lager. I'm the president of Social Intelligence, and we are partnered with AccuSource. And the reason that we are partnered, and really kind of the benefits to you if you are an AccuSource client or you're considering being an AccuSource client, is that what it does is allow AccuSource to supply these social media reports. And on your end, it's a easy to use workflow. It's just, you're getting your other background checks, you need a social media check, it's all done through AccuSource. Social Intelligence is supplying that data and supplying that kind of manpower behind that, very specific task that we do, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. We're the experts in that area, and we supply that for AccuSource clients. And so what you gain out of that is a fully compliant program. Of course, if you are an AccuSource client already, it's a trusted program that you're already embedded in, so that and you have confidence in everything that you're experiencing on the AccuSource platform is one that is, surrounded by compliance and really thinking about how this impacts you from a client experience perspective. So without further ado, a little more about social intelligence. Who are we? Where did we come from? What is this social media company? What is this about? Well, as a matter of fact, most people are surprised by the fact that we've actually been doing this since 2010. So going on 11 years now, we actually pioneered the industry in terms of social media background screening. In 2010, you can imagine the social media landscape, the society landscape, and how we work with social media. It was a different sort of feeling, and it was an uphill battle at first to kind of get people to say, hey, should your boss really be looking at your Facebook? As employers ourselves, the question really was, well, we know there's information online that might be relevant to the workplace, but how do you formalize this and not spend hours and hours digging through people's photos and exposing yourself to information that at best is none of your business and at worst is violating their privacy rights? So that's what we set out to do. And very soon after that, the Federal Trade Commission, who at the time was the key federal bureaucratic agency responsible for consumer privacy and consumer protections, they did an audit of social intelligence, and they really came on premise, and there was Senate Privacy Committee questions and all sorts of kind of insight and really looking under the hood at social intelligence of what's this all about and what does it mean. It had never been done before. And I think this is an important story to tell because when people ask, well, is this compliant? Is this legal? And we say, yeah, FCRA this, and, throw out a bunch of acronyms. What does that really mean? Well, what it really means in social intelligence case, and this is very rare, not just for social media screening companies, but for consumer reporting companies in general, for the Federal Trade Commission to actually come into your business, take a look at what you're doing, and then come out the other side and say, okay, they're following FCRA. They are a consumer reporting agency. And so far, so good. We reserve the right to check back on you later, which is about as best as you can get from the Federal Trade Commission. But it's important from your perspective to, understand that information because it was a time period where that question was asked of, quote, unquote, is this legal? Is this okay? And the answer really is when a third party vendor is providing this information in the way that we're providing it, we have to abide by FCRA standards, just like AccuSource does and any other type of background screen. And that's really important because it just lays out very simple ground rules, actually. We have to follow the same standards as criminal background reports and credit reports and all this kind of stuff. So it is the same thing in terms of the information and the data that you are supplying or we are supplying to you. And so I think that's important to really kind of set up the conversation of how this works and what social intelligence's angle is in trying to mimic that report to look like other reports that you are already familiar with, and to certainly abide by the same accuracy standards and legal process operational standards that you would have to do with any other background screen. And again, through the AccuSource platform, makes it very simple because you're already there, you're already getting other type of background screens. This is essentially, a product that goes, right and complements your other program. So some background there. I'm going to pause for a poll. We would really love to have your interaction. We have 3 polls today, and we'd love to see, your interaction here on the first poll. I'm also going to take the time to say hello to Cynthia, but I'll read this poll really quickly. How does your organization currently handle online screening? Select all that applies, so it's not exclusive. You can select more than one answer. Are hiring managers Googling candidates? Is HR Googling candidates? Do you not have an official process, but you suspect it might be happening without your knowledge? Do you utilize already a compliant third-party process? Or no documented, undocumented process? It absolutely does not happen in your organization. Cynthia, hello. Welcome to the webinar, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this poll question.
Thank you, Bianca. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. It's funny. I've been in this industry, since infancy. We often joke about that when we get over that 20-year mark. And And it's funny because, you know, going back, over the years, many times I've heard managers do it, you know, based upon just Googling someone or depending on the role, you know, deciding to Google someone, but maybe not Googling all their employees. And I say Google, I don't want to offend anyone who, you know, utilizes any of the other search engines, but,
Bing. Maybe
you
they
know,
Bing.
it was mostly kind of a one-off. Maybe it was kind of a one-off process, but you know, now we're starting to see where a lot of employers are becoming more concerned with compliance and equality, and so they, you know, and treating all employees equally, and so therefore we're starting to see a greater trend towards utilizing a compliant third-party screening process.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And thank you so much for your thoughts here. And, you know, not to sway the jury here in any way, but, you know, it's always interesting to kind of think about how we're thinking about the wider audience and what you're seeing out there in the market. So thank you, Cynthia. And again, lovely to say hello to you. I think let's go ahead and if anybody, the last few seconds here, want to submit your answers. It looks like we had a lot of participation. So let's go ahead and shut that down and launch the answers for everybody so we can see what everybody else thinks. And I think that's the juiciest part about polls. It's just like, is what I do at my organization the same as others? You know, and Cynthia, what you said is absolutely tracking. We use a compliant third-party screening process has become a very competitive answer here. You know, in doing these webinars the past 5 or 6 years or so, it would be a very low answer, you know, in those earlier days to say if people were using. So it is climbing the charts. Cynthia, any surprises there from you?
You know, it does seem like more and more employers are really thinking about social media screening and online screening as more of a part of their overall background screening process and less of a one-off, you know, that they might choose to do on just certain staff members. So the fact that it's tracking higher definitely coincides with that.
Yeah, so interesting. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I think that it's always so interesting to understand too, you know, no official process, I expect this happening, no documented process. You know, if that's you and your organization and you're here today, you know, it's hopefully a way for you to say, hey, you know, it's not really, we haven't really gone there yet, but so I want to really learn about this. Or maybe this is already happening, so we know we kind of got to get it together. So hopefully that is also the case here, and we are happy to have you. All right, so let's get into the juiciness of it all. I think this is always the most interesting part when I share some data and insights that we have about social media usage trends. Social Intelligence is a company that spends our life on the internet. That's basically what we do. A lot of times when I talk about this part of it and talk about, you know, the ins and outs of different platforms, we do spend time sometimes discussing and teaching people how the internet works in some ways, or the nuances therein. And so, you know, on the left side of your screen, you know and love most of these guys, Facebook, the Twitters, the LinkedIns. This is probably a platform or two on here that you log into every day, if not at least once a week. You're sharing stuff, you're updating your job statuses or sharing interesting articles on LinkedIn. Maybe you're following people on Twitter or Instagram. Certainly probably using YouTube, right? You know, taking a look at content online. Some of these other ones, Ask FM, Tumblr, maybe you don't use that much, but you know, they actually are pretty active platforms, not quite the same usage level of the behemoths that is, well, Facebook truly. Facebook actually has, it really stands out there, over 2 billion active monthly users. So that's well over a quarter of the world's population every month, at least once, logs into Facebook, which is just an astounding stat. I'm always impressed with that, or sort of kind of blown away by that, I suppose. They do own Instagram too. So between those two platforms, there are hundreds of millions, and I think upwards of pushing maybe even a billion, but certainly hundreds of millions. Last I checked, I want to say 500 million photos per day that were being uploaded constantly. So there's a lot of content is really the point I'm trying to make here. Not just on one specific platform, but just even if you isolate, and here I isolated kind of the most popular ones. Popular to us is the content that we see the most, the content or the places and platforms where we see profiles created most often. So we generally find most folks have between 4 to 6 public profiles, and it's a mixture of these platforms and maybe some other private stuff, but we see these come up quite a bit. TikTok is obviously an emerging one. You probably heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, your kids are probably on it or want to be on it. So that is certainly, you know, when you have teenagers or young kids, that's something that is probably in your sphere. If you look on the right, these are probably platforms that you might have heard in the news. Parler has certainly made a lot of splashes over the past year, 8chan as well. And these sites are niche sites. They're niche parts of the internet that do have sometimes growing populations using them. However, you know, what I always like to make very clear here, and sometimes people, you know, are really concerned about content on these niche sites. We certainly find potentially adverse content on these sites, absolutely. And with social intelligence's method and the way we go about it, you know, we are looking as far as everywhere on the internet goes. However, do know that these are, in terms of usage and the amount of users on these platforms, the probability of finding adverse content is low just because there's just not a lot of users on there in comparison to the more popular ones that are just kind of more mainstream that people know all the time. The ones on the right usually have sort of a specific kind of reason or common interest that people are coming together. Sometimes it is because they want to have a freer internet, and the idea behind it is free speech and potentially, you know, politically leaning towards groups that agree with that kind of political thinking. The Weed Tube's pretty obvious what they talk about. So you can see sort of these kind of niche places in the internet you might hear about in the news, but, you know, I always do like to set up the idea that, keep in mind, you know, still fairly low usage there. This chart is basically the way that social intelligence thinks about the internet. This is the way we break it down and we categorize the internet. So we're talking about social media. We're really not just talking about Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. We're talking about anywhere online where there is a social networking opportunity. So one thing that always stands out for folks on here is Amazon. Amazon, what do you mean? There's no social media Amazon? Well, there is actually. You can create wish lists, you can share wish lists, you can comment on other people's wish lists, you can make those public or private. And I'll just say that it's amazing the amount of information that we'll find on there where people are just not realizing potentially that it is public information. So these are all places where there is propensity for folks to share information. And it's just a lot. It's a lot for, you know, the folks that answered in our poll, you know, that they're Googling the candidates or they suspect it's happening unofficially. There's a lot of places on the internet where you could find somebody. You could go down endless rabbit holes and spend a lot of time doing it. And it is something that social intelligence does all day long, day in, day out. So there's a whole lot here and a whole lot of platforms and just a whole lot of trends and emerging things that are going on that you may never even be on your radar. So a simple Google doesn't always cut it, nor does it necessarily really even put you on a constructive path to find what it is that you're looking for. And so outside of the platforms and where information is, let's talk about what information that social intelligence is looking at or that is of concern right now towards folks that are, you know, starting to be concerned about online data and social media data and how it affects the workplace. Well, a very prevalent and obvious thing that we hear in the news all the time and probably has leaked into your organization to some degree. We hear this a lot when there is harassment or bullying situations, when toxic work environments become affected by hate speech. And politically charged, certainly sometimes very difficult to figure out what is hate speech and what isn't. And it's a very valid question, and it is certainly something that social intelligence has had to grapple with as an organization. When we are looking for adverse or potentially adverse data online, what are we, how do we define what intolerance is and what hate speech is? And so social intelligence's answer for this is a very complex one. We actually look towards sources that are outside of ourselves, that are credible, that work on these types of definitions. So we're talking about the FBI, we're talking about the CIA, we're talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League. These are groups that spend their time defining hate groups, hate symbols, and slurs. And so we have a conglomerate of a database we call the Social Intelligence and Tolerance Database. And we're able to add this both to our technology and our human review process, so that when you get a report back that says, hey, you have some potentially intolerant behavior possibly here that could affect the workplace, you have also a definition of how this hate group is defined, who defined it as identified it as a hate group, and you know, that it wasn't just social intelligence sort of calling the shots saying, oh, that's hate speech. We are kind of getting back to credible sources so that you can reference them. And so when there is a candidate conversation or something that needs to be escalated, you have as much data and evidence and facts as possible going into that. Again, complex issue, not something that, you know, something that your organization is necessarily going to build a database like this or know, you know, what intolerance or hate speech is when you do see it or when you don't see it. Another trend online that is ever concerning is violence. We released an annual trends report at the beginning of this year because we were curious to see how the pandemic affected the adverse content that we were finding. So you can see the categories here, content that we categorize stuff by and what they were pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. One of the things that we didn't really expect, I suppose, is the jump up in violence reports. And so what that means is that, you know, post-pandemic or during the pandemic, there was, we're not post-pandemic, are we? Not quite. It was a bigger jump that than we usually see in reports containing violence. And the specific category of that was threats online. And it tracks. It was a very emotional year for most people. And as surprising as it was for me, even personally, to see this data, it was also something that I think made a lot of sense in terms of how people were venting. Social media in general is an emotional place. It's an emotional place where people are sharing their emotions, and it can be very dynamic. And that is not something that is lost on social intelligence, and certainly something that we view ourselves a little bit as sociologists in trying to digest this information, categorize it correctly, find it, of course, accurately, and present it to you as a potential area of risk where you can ascertain if that is something that you need to escalate or not. This is another way that we categorize the information. So again, this is the, you know, in the upper left-hand corner here, these are the sites where adverse content or potentially adverse content comes back the most. So again, it's the Facebook, Twitters, Instagrams of the world where we're finding the most content simply because there is more content on there, right? It is just, you have a higher likelihood of having a profile here, and you have a higher likelihood of a lot more content being shared on here. That being said, these needles in the haystack, I always say there's a quality versus quantity situation happening sometimes here, where even though we don't find it that often, what is the impact of even that one Amazon wish list or that one Ask FM question that is potentially going to create risk for any organization? So social intelligence uses a top-down approach where we're looking at the internet as a wide whole to see where somebody's online footprint may live. So it can really come from anywhere, and it doesn't surprise, I think, really anybody to know that for the most part, it comes most often from those most popular sites. In general, we categorize stuff by year as well. Put it into context for you. When did this happen? Was this yesterday? Was this 5 years ago? Per FCRA, the scope of the report is 7 years. Most of the time, it comes back within the past 3 years. So you have about, 3 years where generally it's most likely to happen, and then it kind of breaks down from the rest of the time. We also categorize it by content type. So when you think about Facebook, Twitter, really any platform, there's the possibility for you to create your own content, original content. It's your photo, you typed it out, it's your thought. Or did you reshare it? Did you think this was interesting? An article, a post by someone else, a picture? Is this a share? Are you simply liking or following this? Is this something that you've endorsed sort of on the internet to say, I'm interested in this topic? And actually, we actually find some of the intolerance stuff can creep up a lot in this category Because of the names of the types of hate groups that have been identified by those organizations, they have very sneaky names, things that you wouldn't expect. And so I think a lot of times most folks could be following these things with the intention, not necessarily the intention of perpetuating intolerance or hate group. However, nonetheless, knowing that that is a situation, sometimes there does need to have a conversation to say, you know, what is your intention here? What's going on? Should a client Google that and see that you are following and liking, interacting with the hate group, we might have a problem here. So important to really categorize and put into context what's going on there. Whoa, I got mouse happy. Last stat over here, demographics. Certainly, again, very similar to here. More likely to see somebody under 30, have something captured. However, again, quality versus quantity situation here. Not to say that if you're older, you're pretty much never going to have adverse content. It's really the quantity or quality of that content that matters. Here's how it breaks down in terms of what we generally see the most. Intolerance is generally at the top of the categories for us because it is a very big, broad category. So if you think about it, it is tolerance against disabilities, against sexism, hate speech, discrimination. It's a very broad category. And again, we have very careful and legally crafted definitions of what those things are. It can be summed up as derogatory information against somebody in a protected class because of their protected class status. However, again, very broad. So there's a lot of specifics on these types of hits, so to speak, of flags being captured so that we can give you as much context around what we found and then what that credible source is to, who helped us define how that is intolerant. These three generally kind of go up and down in terms of swapping each other. Violence has always been kind of one that has been fairly low, but again, it's kind of jumped up in the last most recent data that we pool in general. Okay, so, breather for a second. That was a lot of data and information and context into, the statistics that we see, the platforms that you use online, the different behaviors that we capture or that we see. And I think you're starting to get the picture here that what social intelligence provides for AccuSource clients is the background report that is going to show you if there is a potential risk opportunity here for you to review. Much like a criminal report, much like any other type of background screens, is there something here that could be worrisome, or could be something that needs to be addressed within the organization, or that very, very blatantly violates our code of conduct, violates our values, mission statement, our policy. So all that being said, when you have one of these reports or what these reports are, how do you formalize this process? What does this mean to your organization, and how does a formal social media screening program work? Well, we'll start with the why. Why are folks doing this? Why are you here at this webinar? Why do we do this ever? It started online and ended up in the workplace, or it started in the workplace and ended up online. It's a tale as old as time. I heard this quote once at a trade show, and it's never lost me, because I think that now more than ever, this is the reality. This is what we're facing, is that online bullying, and ever more in the remote workplace, conversations that are having online, clients and fellow employees or colleagues that are Googling other folks or employees of the organization. You're starting to see this stuff and say, hey, you hired that guy? What's going on? I Googled him, you didn't Google him, as if it's that simple. But it is forcing organizations to sort of confront this situation. And these are very real and very, common workplace concerns that you deal with for lots of other reasons. These are the reasons you do background checks in general: hostility, harassment, bullying, safety of customers and employees, or obvious one, right? We want to keep folks safe. Negligent hiring practices and lawsuits. Those are really major reasons why consumers, why employees really need to feel like they can trust you, and that you are doing something safe, and that you didn't blow it in your diligence process to not even try. Social media has a very unique pressure, the viralness of it all, the risk of bad publicity. It's something that's actually very real to a lot of organizations, and depending on who and what your organization is, This comes in many different forms. It could come internally. It could come from your smaller community. It could come from a broader global or national audience. So again, that idea of I Googled this guy and you didn't. Why didn't you even bother to do that? Can create very real external and internal areas of risk and difficulty for a lot of organizations. So like I reviewed earlier before, in moving into, taking that idea of, this is a problem for us, we have areas of concern. Now, how do we formalize this, and what are the rules, and how do we actually know that we're, following the right path here? That investigation in 2011 made it really clear and easy for folks to say, okay, doing it with a third party is probably a good idea because it's more efficient. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that I don't know, accuracy concerns, putting things into context, making sure behavior is defined really well and can kind of legally be upheld in any kind of adverse employment decision. We really need to have somebody who's an expert in this situation. So what does that expert need to do, and what does that expert need to follow? Well, again, FCRA makes that pretty straightforward. If you are familiar with your background check process, and you're here, so I'm assuming that you are, these terms are something that you are very familiar with. Having a permissible purpose, employment, having proper disclosures and authorizations, which is something AccuSource takes care of for you, adverse action, consumer disputes and reinvestigations, reasonable policies and procedures concerning accuracy. These are all the things that both social intelligence and AccuSource need to be aware of and need to make sure that you are aware of and that we're all playing by the fair rules. And, point here really is that in a social media screening vendor, these are also the things that need to happen. And another sort of plus and upside for, trusting a vendor and trusting somebody who has expertise in the situation to say, hey, this is how it should be done. This is how other people do it. With social media screening compliance, it's not just the FCRA though. It really goes well beyond FCRA in terms of privacy information, protected class information, both at the federal and the state level. You Google somebody, you pull up their Facebook, let's say, you are very quickly exposed to all sorts of very personal information, what church they go to, their marital status, their military status, all sorts of things that you would otherwise maybe not know, maybe you would. And again, potentially none of your business, a waste of your time to kind of filter through this information, or potentially something that's going to violate and create bias. I always say that when you are looking at somebody's online profile, what you're starting to do is create a narrative about them. You're starting to create a story. And so for better or worse, how does that impact your organization? Well, in 26 states now in the United States, they have put laws that do make it violations for employers. What was happening a few years back is employers were kind of turning the laptop around in an interview saying, hey, log in, I need access to your private social media accounts. So many states are taking the stance that that's a no-no. And again, further influences and emphasizes the fact that, having a trusted provider that is outside of your organization handle this is really the way to go. This formula down here at the bottom is one that I repeat quite often. Business-related behaviors, consistency plus policy plus documentation equals actionable. That's how you formalize a process. A part of that documentation and policy equation is potentially a social media policy. Now, folks can get a little bit overwhelmed by this, or folks can really kind of think, oh my gosh, that's a whole can of worms, many meetings to go. Sometimes you certainly need to bring the lawyers in to make sure everything is up to snuff, but for the most part, what we've seen clients successfully do is reflect their code of conduct policy to include social media, or create a specific social media policy that has a few bullet points of specific behavior that is not going to be conducive to a productive workplace. These are some examples of bullet points here and how those can exactly play out. So certainly a lot, less of a heady process than you would think, and we've seen it, happen really quickly. And of course, this is a great example for you to sort of think on and ruminate over. One of the last trends and really things that we've seen in terms of people and organizations employing a formalized social media screening is because of and to support diversity and inclusion initiatives. D&I leaders are certainly, a couple years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, is when I first heard of a client saying, yeah, we have our D&I leader sort of weigh in on these reports and help us to digest them and understand, do we need to talk to the candidate, have a teachable moment to say, hey, this could be, seen as offensive. Did you know you posted that? Let's talk about it. Can you delete it? It isn't necessarily a zero-sum game where somebody comes back on this report and you're out of a job. It's also about supporting individuals in making sure that they do learn and grow and potentially can still contribute to your workplace in a positive way. But yeah, that inappropriate couple of tweets that we found in 2018, how can we, learn better now, and how can we move forward, and how can you identify ways that, we're going to try not to violate those policies or offend folks. So D&I leaders certainly getting involved here. Okay, going to take another quick breather before we power through the next couple slides, because up next, we're going to talk about your social media screening workflow. So I talked a little bit about what that formalized process looks like, but we want to talk about now, as an AccuSource client, what that experience is going to be. So in putting ourselves in your shoes, please do participate in this poll if you could. What type of online content posted by a job candidate would be concerning to your organization? And we're very conscious and aware of what is important to your organization and what is unique to you. Cynthia, again, we'd love to have your thoughts here, weigh in.
So in a lot of the clients that I speak with, some of the most concerning content has to do towards discriminatory comments towards a protected class, drug use, and violence, and threatening, potentially either criminal or pre-criminal behavior. And I say that because one of the things that I've started hearing from clients is, it's not just their HR departments that are concerned about this, but potentially their risk management departments as well, is basically not just criminal behavior, but pre-criminal behavior. In other words, they don't want to wait until someone commits a crime to then have an action. If you can start to see that pre-criminal behavior occurring in what they post on social media, if you can start to see that behavior starting to form, then you have an opportunity to do something about it before something bad happens. And so I would say that those are probably the 3 areas that are probably, most concerning.
I couldn't agree more. I'm assuming that that's what it's going to reflect here. And hey, all this stuff is not great generally, but it is also important to, think about it from your organization's perspective. Like, what is a priority? What is a priority for you? So let's go ahead and give it 5 more seconds. Why not? And go ahead and finish up that participation and close the poll, and then we can launch. And I'm so excited to see what the results might be, although I have a suspicion of what's going to be number 1. It usually is, but let's see what we get. Yes, 92% violent, threatening, criminal behavior. That's just a no-no, right? That's almost universally from this poll, and I would say for most folks, not going to be okay. Coming in a close second, discriminatory contents related to protected class, a big issue, right? A big issue that we're trying to grapple with, and we're trying to define well, and we're trying to take action on that is appropriate and, something that is legally defensible, I think. So a complicated one. Thank you so much. Let's close this poll out, and we can kind of dive into the next portion of the webinar, especially with those in mind now, with understanding, what kind of information is important to your organization to ascertain from potentially a report like this. Well, how does it work? Where does that come from? How do we know where it's coming from? In quite simple sort of little icons here, I laid out the data flow. So identifying information comes in, of course, to AccuSource and securely is sent to social intelligence. Our artificial intelligence process begins there. And what it is a way for us to very quickly find where people are online. So again, a top-down approach where we're looking anywhere on the internet. You could think about it as a very sophisticated Google search where we're finding where folks are online. And then what happens is that it's a series of tools that our human intelligence analysts are using with our AI platform so that we can filter this information quickly and we can find content rather quickly. So a couple different proprietary tools that come back and forth. And again, obviously trying to do these things at scale and at speed and efficiently is really the name of the game, but accurately as well. So having that human review process and that quality control level to make sure that those algorithms are behaving correctly and that we are looking for anything that I always say, anything that Alexa missed. Did we make sure that she actually turned on the right lights in the right bedroom, or is suddenly the heater on or something? We need to make sure that the algorithms have followed what we need to have completed and what we need to make sure is accurate. What happens from there is that a report is built on any potentially flagged content. So if we found potentially adverse content, whoa, got mouse happy again, then that is where the process is of where we're going to flag it. So what happens, and you'll see a sample of this come out, in a few slides here, is that you have a report that is much like a criminal report. If we find potentially adverse content, we include it on the report. If we don't, you simply get a summary that says, hey, here's where we found John Smith. Nothing to see here, folks. And that's that about that. Should there be flagged content, we do also complete a protected class safety feature in which if there is any protected class information within that tweet, within that picture that we're sharing, we're going to make sure that that is redacted or that is not something that you see or that is simply removed from the actual screenshot so that you can avoid exposing yourself to biased information unnecessarily. These are the categories, and I think you know and love and familiar with them now. These are sort of the things I've talked about a lot in this webinar. These are the 4 main buckets of behavior, and we sort of break it down in a variety of ways. We also have custom filters for clients who need to have a very different behavior. It's pretty rare. These are fairly universal ones that most folks are concerned with from our poll. Most of the folks were leaning towards a potentially illegal category. So again, sort of universal and more importantly, consistently business-related defined online behavior that we can, point to and then add on to a report. These reports do focus on publicly available content, so anything that is publicly available should be reviewed. Now, again, I'm going to take a pause and pass it back over to Cynthia. Now that you know how the report is put together, let's talk about how you order one. Cynthia.
Great, thank you, Bianca. So it's very simple to order a social media report with your standard background screen on our InstaScreen platform. So when placing an order for a social media report, clients can either log into the InstaScreen platform directly or via an ATS or HCM platform integration. Once they are in the InstaScreen platform, they will click on a new order, then select the individual social media product or predefined package containing a social media report. In our example, a package was selected containing a social media basic report. The package also contains the option to upgrade to the social media pro report if desired. Once the required services are selected, the client would simply click on the green Quick App button to advance to the Quick App order screen. Once the Quick App order screen opens, the client will then enter the applicant data, including email address, to send the Quick App invitation link to the applicant via email and then initiate the order. Once the applicant opens the link, they are directed to complete all required consent documents digitally and are provided the opportunity to provide data for any remaining required data fields to facilitate the full screening request. Once the Quick App is complete, the file enters processing at AccuSource. The request for the social media report is then sent electronically to Social Intelligence. Once processed through their platform via the process that Bianca shared, results are then transmitted back to AccuSource and attached to the applicant screening report. The social media report section will be marked with a yellow flag for any report with results containing potentially derogatory findings. This helps draw attention for the client, end users, or other designated reviewers. From the screening report's results screen, end users can simply click on the green text to open the full report for viewing by any end users or designated viewers. And so now I'll turn it back over to Bianca so that she can go through the report itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And yeah, you know, a couple clicks, essentially. That's what we got. A couple clicks, send the request off, get the candidate information, see it right there quickly, easily in your AccuSource dashboard. So what do you see? What is it? What does this report look about? Well, this is what it looks like. This is what a social media background check should look like. The features that you should really be aware of in terms of, do we have the right person? Is there your identifiers and identity resolution information here so that we know that we are looking for the right Javier Doe in this case? What are we looking for? Did we find flagged content? This is the summary of what the report actually found. In here, in this instance, there's a couple categories of information that we found. Where do we find it? And then how many flags per category? So in each, you know, you could have illicit drugs found on Facebook and found on Instagram, and tolerance maybe found in a couple places. So there's generally, you know, these numbers are different depending on what platform that we found it on, and then under what category that was found. How many total accounts were confirmed? We flagged stuff on Facebook and Instagram, but you know, he also had a LinkedIn, he also had a Twitter. It looks like there was no flags there. This, and of course, doesn't exactly track. We have a different report now. This is Meg Doe, but a different screenshot here. It's been pointed out to me, actually, it's a little bit confusing because we should probably keep it consistent, because Meg Doe wouldn't show up on Javier Doe's report. This is for Meg Doe specifically. So on her report, if we took a deeper dive into the flags that came back there, it is illicit drugs. We found it on Twitter. It was very recent in 2021. Subject generated, meaning she created it herself. The identifiers that we use are repeated here, and that we found a pattern of behavior of Meg. This is the kind of content she puts out a lot on Twitter. So again, these are the features that, you know, you want to understand came out. This is what you would see, an example of the types of content that might be found on here. And of course, you know, we use fairly light examples here, so not to, you know, not to be too disturbing, but it can run a gambit of disturbing or non-disturbing content. Again, should there be any protected class information? This is sort of an example of John Smith here identifying what church he goes to, but then also using a potentially, you know, derogatory statement in a racial capacity later in the tweet, or in the Facebook post, I should say. So on your actual report, this would be redacted out. Within the social intelligence platform, an unredacted version is always available, but for that kind of first glance, just to make sure that you are not exposed to any bias information, we do redact that on that first pass. Now, a couple things here in terms of customer support. When you are ordering social media reports through the AccuSource platform, you are eligible to participate in Social Intelligence's training program. Anybody can do it, and I cannot emphasize this the most. I highly, highly, highly recommend doing this. For the most part, some of you folks might not have any practice in social media reports, and so this is a way to get your team together, make sure that you have a process of how to deal with the reports once you get them, how to escalate them, who's involved, making sure everybody's on the same page, and making sure your policies are intact there. So it's a pretty short, generally an hour or two training program, and it really, really helps to make a successful process. Other things that are available to you are policy samples and filter guidelines. Again, like I talked about, having those policies in place are really important to back up any potentially adverse decisions that you're making. And we have lots of examples that we can share with you that have been successfully used with clients before, as well as filter guidelines, so that you have confidence and understanding of what each of these categories are, how they're defined, and how we actually find the information. All right, that was so much information. I talked very fast, so thank you for bearing with me, everybody. Last poll question we're going to launch here to close it up before we have a few minutes for Q&A. The question here is, how do you think online screening could have an impact at your organization? So after everything you've learned today, please select all that apply. And again, we're really conscious of what is important to you at your specific organization. What's a priority, and what do you think? How do you think it could have an impact? Cynthia, anything you've been hearing out there in the marketplace, or any thoughts here as we close it out?
Actually, I'm really interested in seeing how the results of this come back, because I have seen literally all of these different reasons for doing social media screening and the impacts that it can have on an organization. What the goals that our end users are looking to support. I've had each and every one of them raised in conversation with them. I do think that clearly D&I is something that's becoming very, very important, and I do feel like that may be the one that wins. But I do know that reducing risk and of violent behavior, and also upholding core code of conduct and company core values is also going to be something that could possibly come back as one side. So I'm really, really interested in seeing how people rate these.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's give everybody just another 5 seconds or so before we close this out. But I agree. And look, we have these answers in here for a reason. Generally, these are the ones that are important to most people. But to really kind of take a step back to say, well, what is most important to my organization, or what are the top one or two? How could that really tomorrow make an impact at my organization? What are we concerned about today? What are we concerned about right now? So let's take a look at the results and see what is up there in terms of risk, top of the line there. Of course,
Thought that was possible.
Yeah, right. I mean, hey, we're talking about background screening. We're in the business of risk, right, Cynthia?
Absolutely. It's funny too. I think that organizations are starting to look at risk a little bit differently, especially, and I would say post-COVID. I know we're still not quite out of COVID yet, but as some organizations are starting to return back to the workplace, I think there are some new concerns that are popping up, and so it would be interesting to take the same poll, like say a year from now, and just kind of see where the heads of HR and risk mitigation are at that point, because I have a feeling there's a growing trend towards with a lot of your employees, you don't see them every day like you used to. And so, this understanding more about behavior, outside of when they're physically in the workplace is becoming, more and more of a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that effect, a year or two ago, maybe supports diversity and inclusion initiatives wouldn't even have been on the list or considered as a risk factor. But now, of course, more than ever, and I think rightly so, these are areas that we need to concentrate on to support productive workplaces, to support productive employees and happy employees. So thank you all for your participation. Great participation in the polls today. Couldn't be more thrilled with that. And, I'll just kind of have some closing thoughts before we go, is to say, again, a lot of information on here. We hope that you learned something today. We couldn't be more thrilled to partner with AccuSource to deliver concise reporting. We try to do it as fast as possible and as accurately as possible. And it was a pleasure for me to be here today to share with you all the information that we have, and hopefully pass it on to you. And April, are you gonna close us out here and or get us the questions?
I am. Thank you, Bianca and Cynthia. We will now dedicate the remainder of the webinar to addressing attendee questions. If you've not had a chance to ask a question via our chat box, please feel free to do so now.
Thanks, April. The first question, Bianca, is how do you differentiate people who are liking or following a topic out of true interest versus an academic interest or someone who wants to keep an eye on that type of content?
Yeah, the only way you can do that is by talking to the individual. I think that that is a lot of times a first step that an organization, and certainly we see our clients take when there is sort of this hey, you know, this seems a little bit out of character, or this seems like maybe they're not they don't even know that this might be a quote hate group or something like that, or really we don't know. And so let's come from a place of genuine curiosity, and let's ask to say, hey, you know, we found that you are following 3 groups that are defined as hate groups by these organizations. Did you know that? What you know, you know, what is that about? That, and I think you have to put it in context of any other type of content that we might find on the person. Put it into context of any other type of information you find from other background reports. You know, is this really something that is sort of a needle in a haystack? Like, wow, that just doesn't seem to track with his personality. Or is this something that is like, oh yeah, you like these groups, you also posted some original content or have a video out there sort of supporting these ideologies. Putting that all into context together will really give you a solid idea. And if all else fails, have a conversation with the person.
Thank you. We're almost at the end of our time. This will be the final live question. Again, attendees, if you've entered a question into the chat box and we did not have an opportunity to address it live, our team will follow up with you directly post-webinar to provide an answer. Question is, how do you know the candidate really posted the information? Could their account have been hacked?
Sure. So a great process and point to formalizing your social media process with a third-party vendor is that they have the opportunity to dispute it. When you are Googling somebody kind of ad hoc or pulling up their Facebook and you build a biased narrative about them, they don't have the opportunity to say, well, wait a minute, that wasn't me, or that was this, or whatever it was. So in a formalized process, should there be information ascertained that was adverse, and the candidate has the opportunity to say, well, that's a background check that looks inaccurate to me, and here are the reasons why I think it's inaccurate. From there, that dispute process comes back to social intelligence, and we investigate further and or advise depending on what the circumstances are. I will say disputes are incredibly rare and low in our business, which is unusual. It's not the same in criminal reports. Kind of, you know, mistakes and inaccuracies happen all the time. However, in social media land, there is a lot of ways that we can identify the patterns of behavior are correct and are the same throughout profiles and different things. Not only that, I think there is actually something a little sort of off-putting or a little bit intimidating when somebody knows that they did something that they probably shouldn't have done. Well, most people just cop up to it and say, you know, hey, I'm sorry. So the "it wasn't me" thing is rarer than you would think it is, and certainly if that was actually true and valid, they have the opportunity to dispute that.
Thank you, Bianca and Cynthia, for facilitating this informative webinar. And special thanks to our attendees for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at marketing@accusource-online.com.